This past summer, one of my friends from high school sent a link in our Discord server to the My Anime List page for Anne no Nikki, or Anne Frank's Diary, which is an anime version of Anne Frank. Yeah, that's a real thing. At first, I was actually a little creeped out by this. Why would somebody make an anime based on Anne Frank? When I think of anime, I think of magical girls, space bounty hunters, or just a bunch of school kids. You know, fictional stuff. But an anime about an actual historical figure? What? Then I was kinda intrigued, because I'd never heard of any animated films based on the Holocaust. I was also curious to see if it was a respectful adaptation of the diary, which I read in 8th grade. So I read reviews for it online, and was kinda disappointed to see so many bad ones. While a user on My Anime List wrote that the best thing in this anime was that they managed showing the life of a teenage girl breaking out to pieces, and the way she felt and the way she thought. An article on Anime News Network, literally titled "Pile of Shame," called it odious filmmaking. Because of this, when I clicked the play button, I was prepared for it to be absolute garbage. But I was surprised to find out for myself that the film was actually pretty good. I don't understand why there are so many reviews ripping it apart. Anne Frank's Diary is a beautiful adaptation of the text it's based on, not to mention it adds more through its unique aesthetic and emotional music. Before I go into comparing the anime to the diary, I'd like to provide a little context for the film. Like I said before, the Japanese title is Anne no Nikki, but the English title is just Anne Frank's Diary. The poster also says The Diary of Anne Frank on the bottom of it, so I guess that's an alternate title. The film was made by Madhouse, a Japanese animation studio that's known for anime like Death Note, Cardcaptor Sakura, and Kirby Right Back at Ya, and it was released in August 1995. However, the English dub wasn't released until May 2020, and now you can actually watch the whole thing for free on YouTube. One of this movie's strongest aspects are the backgrounds, which are just beautiful, especially those shots of Amsterdam that are shown at the beginning and the end. One reviewer actually complained about the general aesthetic of the movie and said that the characters looked flat, gray, and unrealized, and I wouldn't really go that far, but their faces do look a lot like that one anime filter on Snapchat. I wouldn't call that a bad thing, though. There's nothing wrong with using a less cartoonish character design in an animated film. I can tell they were going for a more realistic style here compared to what most people think of when they hear the word anime. The aesthetic as a whole kinda reminds me of Studio Ghibli, maybe because of the outdoor shots that look almost magical in some scenes, and because of the warm color palette. As for the grayness that this user complains about, I can tell that was intentional. The color palette is more on the dull side to fit the mood of the whole film. It's not supposed to be all colorful. Living in Europe during the Holocaust was scary and uncertain, and they constantly lived in fear of getting caught. 6 million innocent Jews were rounded up and murdered just because they were Jewish. When you take that into consideration, rainbows don't really seem fitting for a movie like this. Also, let's not forget that they hid in that little attic for 2 years, and they didn't go outside once. That's not an easy thing to do, and staying inside for such a long time can make somebody feel like they're gonna go crazy. The dull color palette is just another creative tool that contributes to the tone of the movie. Okay, so now on to the actual story. Anne Frank's diary starts around her 13th birthday, and in her earliest letter-style entries in her diary that she calls Kitty, she writes about pretty mundane stuff, like what she thinks of her friends, boys she's interested in, and what she did at school that day. The diary is mostly where Anne writes about her active social life as a young teen, and her life seems mostly uneventful until July 8th, 1942. That's when she writes a diary entry talking about how her family is going to go into hiding after they receive a frightening call-up notice in the mail requesting for her older sister Margot to be sent to a labor camp. Meanwhile, the film opens with several establishing shots of Amsterdam, in addition to Anne's home, before cutting to her excitedly waking up on the morning of her 13th birthday and playing with her cat Mortje.
Today's my birthday, you know? I'm 13.
From there, it cuts to a shot of her dad stopping on his way home from work to watch in horror along with a bunch of other passersby as a couple and a small child are loaded onto a truck that will take them to the train station that goes to a Nazi death camp. This juxtaposition of different things going on sets the tone for the rest of the film. We start off pretty happy, but this only lasts for so long before we see that things really aren't so good. The music accurately depicts this change. When we first meet Anne, there's light piano music playing. It's drastically different from the rest of the music we hear in the film, because it lacks that feeling of suspense that we hear in the scene immediately following it. When Otto Frank is watching that family board the truck, the violin music builds tension and makes you feel nervous for the Franks, especially when you notice that Otto's got that yellow Star of David on his coat, so it's only a matter of time before it's his family getting into the back of that trailer.
Auf was wartest du?
The next defining point in Anne Frank's diary is when she and her family finally have to pack up their stuff and leave for the secret annex. This happens in early July 1942, and Anne describes that they had to get going a little earlier than expected because of the call-up notice that they received. She writes, "For months we've been moving as much of our furniture and apparel out of the apartment as we could. It was agreed that we go into hiding on July 16th. Because of Margot's call-up notice, the plan had to be moved up 10 days, which meant we'd have to make do with less orderly rooms." Based on the way she writes about the whole process of leaving, I get the impression that she felt really panicked and afraid. Even though the Franks moved a lot of their furniture out of the apartment in advance, they had to get the rest of their stuff together and out the door pretty quickly. It all happens so fast that Anne tells us she doesn't have a lot of time to think about what she's bringing, recalling, "The first thing I stuck in was this diary, and then curlers, handkerchiefs, schoolbooks, a comb, and some old letters. Preoccupied by the thought of going into hiding, I stuck the craziest things in my bag, but I'm not sorry. Memories mean more to me than dresses." It doesn't even really register for Anne at first what's going on because it's so overwhelming. Imagine somebody telling you one night that tomorrow you're gonna have to wake up at the crack of dawn to leave your house and go stay in some mysterious place for an indefinite period of time. She even mentions her father casually bringing it up one day while they're going for a walk before all this happens, but it doesn't really sink in because all he tells her is to enjoy her freedom while she can. It's not really a concrete thing yet because he hasn't slapped a date on it yet and said, "This is when we're going into hiding." The movie doesn't even mention hiding until Margot gets a call-up notice, but I think the movie does a good job portraying Anne's emotions about leaving. In fact, I might even go so far as to say that it expands on these feelings. Watching the scene where she leaves the house, you really get a sense for how scary it must have been. Especially when Otto tells her that they're gonna have to leave Morcha behind since she assumed they could bring him to the annex with them. That's a massive blow to Anne because, well, that's her cat and she loves him. I have a soft spot for cartoon pets, so I was also kinda sad when she had to leave Morcha behind. Especially after Anne gives him one last hug before heading out the door with her father and sister, and it shows him standing alone on the bed and meowing at them as we hear the door shut. He doesn't even know that he's never gonna see his family again because, well, he's a cat. Anyway, once Anne actually gets going, you can tell she's pretty hesitant about everything. For the whole journey to the secret annex, she sticks behind with her dad while Margot and her mom walk further in the front. When Anne gets there, it takes some prompting and reassurance from her parents to get her up the stairs and into the hideout, and she stays close to her dad out of fear and apprehension. Even though she tries to be brave about it and tells herself,
I feel as if I'm in an adventure film.
you can tell that it's not easy for her. It's a lot for such a young girl to deal with, and so suddenly too. The movie really gives us an idea of how distressing it must have been for a teenage girl like Anne to have to pack up her whole life and basically disappear overnight. Alright, so once everybody settles into the secret annex, not a whole lot goes on in there actually. They gotta diminish themselves and make themselves as small as possible in order to stay hidden. That's the fascinating thing about Anne Frank's diary. Initially, she just writes about whatever stuff people did in the annex that day, which is usually pretty boring and uneventful. But then when she's older, like around the time she's 15, her entries are more introspective and she thinks about abstract concepts like God and what religion means to her, why people act the way they do, and her place in the world as a whole. Not much is really going on outside of Anne's mind. You really get to see her mature while she's hiding. One of the last things she writes about is on the topic of growing up in such an uncertain environment, and she believes that everything will pass, writing, "It's a wonder I haven't abandoned all my ideals. They seem so absurd and impractical. Yet I cling to them because I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are truly good at heart. It's utterly impossible for me to build my life on a foundation of chaos, suffering, and death. I see the world being slowly transformed into a wilderness. I hear the approaching thunder that one day will destroy us too. I feel the suffering of millions. And yet, when I look up at the sky, I somehow feel that everything will change for the better, that this cruelty too shall end, that peace and tranquility will return once more. In the meantime, I must hold on to my ideals, perhaps the day will come when I'll be able to realize them. She was 15 years old when she wrote that. On the other hand, before she goes into hiding and at the beginning of her time in the annex, she's portrayed as chatty and impulsive. In school, she talks so much that she gets in trouble for it, and when she's in the secret annex, her impulsivity gets her in trouble with her parents and everyone else there. Like in the movie, when Dussel first moves into her room, and then the next morning after his first night there, she just lashes out at him and goes off. But as the movie progresses, she doesn't speak her mind as much. The movie actually doesn't include a lot of the abstract stuff that she talks about in her diary, but it does leave us with a quote at the end that isn't in the diary. But it's such a beautiful yet sad ending to the movie, and it works.
My dear, dear Kitty, you're my friend, and I know you understand my message of freedom and compassion for all the men, women, and children of the world, regardless of their race, religion, or belief. May you live in peace and help to make this a better world for all humanity.
Unfortunately, the occupants of the secret annex ended up getting found out after somebody snitched on them. There's no diary entry detailing this, but the text afterward describes what occurred on the morning of August 4th of 1944. Everybody was arrested and sent to Auschwitz. Nobody made it out alive except for Otto Frank. He actually helped get Anne's diary published since she often wrote about her dream of becoming a famous writer. While we never got to read how Anne responded to getting arrested and deported, the anime actually shows it. The sequence even starts off with the date at the bottom of the screen, and because I watched this before I reread the diary, I wondered, what's going to happen on August 4th of 1944? Initially it seems like business as usual in the annex. They talk about the news, which is starting to get hopeful. They're cooking soup, and Peter and Anne are laughing and playing with Peter's cat, Mushi. But then we see shots of the office building below them, and suddenly someone from SS shows up and demands to see the Jews that he's convinced they're hiding.
Where is your director, Mr. Kopois? We know you're hiding Jews here. Where are they?
One of the strongest elements in this scene is its music. It gets more suspenseful as soon as the scene cuts from the annex to the office, and you just know something bad is coming. Sure enough, when it cuts back to the annex, they're all waiting for Meep to show up when they hear noises and voices from outside. And sure enough, SS breaks into their hideout. And the music in this scene really does a great job of showing how the occupants of the secret annex must have felt when they got caught. They felt defeated.
I want you all out in the street in 5 minutes. Do you understand? Bring me all your valuables first. Eure Wertsachen.
Raus!
Ihr
Schnell!
versteht doch Deutsch, nicht wahr?
Just when they thought there was some hope left that they would be free again, they got found out, and all chances of them getting that freedom back were lost. Again, nobody who was in the annex made it out of Auschwitz alive, except for Anne's father. What makes this even sadder is that in the scene right before the day they got caught, everyone is sitting around the table laughing and dreaming of what they'll do once the war ends, and they can actually live their lives again.
Peter, what are you going to do?
Me? I'm gonna go and see all the fantastic films I couldn't see being here.
And of course, Anne will tell you which films you have to see.
Remember at the beginning when Anne was scared to go to the secret annex? There's a scene at the end that contrasts with it. When everyone's heading out of the building to get into the truck after they get arrested, she looks at her father and they nod at each other before climbing into the back of the truck. I saw this as her telling Otto that she was a young woman now, and ready to take on whatever was coming her way. I actually read the stage adaptation of Anne Frank in middle school in addition to the diary, and I remember one of the last stage directions being when Anne was leaving the annex after getting arrested, and it said something about her no longer being a little girl, but a young woman. The last time we see Anne in this film has that same energy. So that's why I actually enjoyed the Anne Frank anime. Going back to when I first found out about this movie and I was like, why would you make an anime of Anne Frank? I think I understand now. They probably made it because of all the different things you can do with animation compared to live action films. There's a bunch of live action movies based on Anne Frank's story, but there's something special about animation. When you do animation, you can design characters differently to contribute to the overall tone of the film. I think of Tim Burton's animated movies, which more often than not tend to have a creepy vibe to them. Stuff like The Nightmare Before Christmas, Frankenweenie, and The Corpse Bride. Frankenweenie, for example, was a live-action movie before it got remade with claymation, and I haven't seen the live-action one yet, but I can tell you that the gothic visual style of the animated version really fits it. I mean, you got classmates who look like classic horror movie tropes like Igor and Frankenstein's monster, and even this creepy girl who carries an equally creepy looking cat around all the time and thinks she's a psychic. But it makes sense because the main plot is on the darker side. It's about a kid who brings his dead dog back to life. In a similar sense, the Anne Frank anime chooses a more realistic style to show that this was real life. If you think about it, this wasn't really that long ago. But one day, there won't be any more Holocaust survivors left alive, and from then on, it'll be up to us to ensure that something as horrific as the Holocaust never happens again. I'm not at all saying that the movie is better than the book, because there's a lot of stuff that Anne addresses in the book that didn't make it to the movie, but I still wouldn't call this a bad film. You really see Anne mature as time passes, and that's basically one of the main things going on in this diary, since we're literally watching her grow up in the secret annex. And again, the music is phenomenal in showing us how the characters are feeling, particularly Anne. The visuals and the music really add to Anne's account of growing up during the Holocaust, and make the emotions that the characters are feeling throughout the movie even stronger. And that's why I believe that Anne No Nikki is a well-executed, respectful adaptation of Anne Frank's diary. Thank you so much for watching.